po. Last week, just a brief context of what happened last week. We talked about the big picture. We talked about human rights. We talked about our constitution. We talked about the noble purpose of sports, which is peace, development, and helping achieve the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. No? Pinag-usapan din natin yung mga various agencies, mga ahensya ng gobyerno na may kinalaman sa sports at dadaanan natin sila ulit ngayong third and fourth module. Second half of last week, we talked about yung mga competitions sa Olympic Committee, sa Paralympic Committee, at ang naging mahalagang discussion last time, and again, I strongly advocate the national athletes and the national sports associations magkaroon ng kanilang sariling athletes agreement. No? Ideal and prudent for everybody, no? All stakeholders, national sports associations, and national athletes to have their own agreement. Which I will also emphasize para sa webinar natin today. I will also underscore the fact that it is important and necessary for teams and their professional athletes and for schools and their student athletes to have their respective agreements. Part of the discussion for this morning will be draft or template agreements sa professional, how to draft one for professional athletes, and a sample participation agreement for our student athletes. So for the first half of this morning, we will talk about professional athletes. And the second half of this morning, we will talk about student athletes. And next week naman, no, mahalaga rin, no? Bababa tayo sa local government level, sports at the LGU level, and how can we better improve sports for peace and development through partnerships. So yun po, no? Exciting discussion this morning. And by the way, katulad ninyo, ako po ay tuloy-tuloy na nag-aaral tungkol sa sports law. At maraming pasasalamat sa Philippine Sports Commission tsaka sa Philippine Sports Institute, kay Chairman Ramirez, to the commissioners, to the PSI community for giving me this opportunity to go through my own continuing learning or continuing education. So umpisahan na po natin like what we did last time. We will have for the first part, we will have a lecture. Then we will have a 5-minute break. Then we will proceed with module 4, which is the second module for this morning. Then we will have another break, a short break to gather all your questions. Then we will have an open forum. And as Joas has mentioned, kindly send your questions to our facilitators. So, magandang umaga sa ating lahat. Module 3 of our 8-module certificate course will be about professional athletes. Last week, we talked about national athletes. We underscored that national athletes, to my mind, it is my opinion, are not employees of their respective national federations, but are beneficiaries. This particular concept, or advocacy, if you may, is reflected in my template agreement for between an NSA, a National Sports Association, and a national athlete. For now, we will talk about professional athletes. We have 3 topics for this module. What will be the mandate of the Games and Amusement Board? We discussed this also last week, but we will now cover Gaap in greater detail this morning. We will talk about professional athletes, who they are, what are their benefits, what will be their status. And I will be presenting towards the end of our discussion on this module will be what are the contents or the sections or the provisions for professional athletes. Like last time, we started off with a quizzer, a self-test. So I request everyone to answer using the icons in your Zoom. Check for yes or true, and X for no and false. Sorry, apologies. I'll just put my phone in silent mode. Thank you. So let's start with question or statement number 1. The Games and Amusement Board, or Gaap, has no similarity with the Commission on Elections. Yes or no? So please click in your answers. The answer to this is no or false, because Gaap has certain similarities with the Commission on Election. 1, both are collegial bodies. 2, while the Commission on Election is independent from the executive branch of government, Gaap, and this is one difference between the two, would be Gaap is under the office of the president. Both are administrative agencies and both are public offices. Okay? So, yun po ang ilang similarities between Gaap and the Commission on Elections. And another similarity would be both admin agencies can issue rules and regulations. And this I will also highlight later on, both Gaap and the Commission on Elections have the power to resolve controversies. We call that in administrative law quasi-judicial powers. So the answer here is false. Number 2, Gaap has jurisdiction over amateur athletes or national athletes of national sports associations. And again, by way of review, if you recall our Module 1 last week, we said that Gaap has jurisdiction over professional sports or professional athletes, while the Philippine Sports Commission has jurisdiction over amateur athletes and national athletes of NSAs. So the answer to number 2 is X, or no or false. The Gaap cannot suspend a team. Yes or no? The answer is, if you examine the charter of Gaap, one of the functions of Gaap is to suspend a team under its enforcement powers and under its quasi-judicial powers. In fact, it has recently, and I went over some news items about Gaap, they have, in fact, in the past, suspended a team. Of course, there must be a cause and there must be a hearing in order that the team must be given due process. They must be notified and there must be a hearing before they can be suspended. So the answer to number 3 is X, because Gaap can suspend a team. Number 4, a professional athlete with a live contract, with an existing contract with a team, can violate that contract. Check or X? For all of us, and I'm sure all of us have entered into contracts, whether written or verbal contracts, we cannot violate the contracts that we have entered into voluntarily. And if ever you want to get out of a contract, there would be a legal process for that. You can question the contract, but for as long as your contract is live, it is subsisting, a professional athlete who, with his or her consent, signed that contract has no option but to respect the terms and provision of that contract. So answer to number 4 is likewise X. A conflict between 1, your contract, and 2, the law, is resolved in favor of the former. The former here is the athlete's contract. So for lawyers here, attending this webinar. The answer to this is fairly obvious. And I suppose even for non-lawyers and fellow students, the answer here is false. Why? If there's a conflict between a contract on one hand and a law on the other, and then the law must prevail. All laws actually are read into each and every contract that we sign. And number 6, professional athletes are employees of their teams. Okay. So earlier, last week, I took the position that national athletes of national federations are not employees, but are beneficiaries of their respective national sports associations. Now, we were talking about a different class of athletes. We talk about athletes of teams, whether it's basketball or volleyball or any other professional sport. Are they employees of their teams? Okay. So please click in your answer, yes or no. But for purposes of the statement number 6, I will suspend my answer. I will not I'll share my answer at this point. I will discuss this as we proceed with module number 3, which is the first module for now. So please type in your answers. Let PSI and POC know your answers, and we will discuss this shortly. For professional sports, what would be the relevant government agency? It will be, as shown here, and by the way, this slide, if you recall, we showed this last time. For professional sports, it will be the Games and Amusement Board. Last time, when we talk about the national federations or those in the Olympics and the Paralympics, it will be the Philippine Sports Commission. But for professional sports, it would be the Games and Amusement Board. And again, let me also highlight, and this I underscored last time, that here in the Philippines, sports governance is decentralized. It is decentralized at the horizontal level. Here at the top would be at the national level. And it is also vertically decentralized, meaning up to schools and even local government units, provinces, cities, municipalities, and barangays, and even at the autonomous region level. So, but for professional sports, it will be the Games and Amusement Board. This slide, if you recall, again, what I'm trying to do for this lecture and my future, our future Tuesdays would be every so often I will just do, by way of recap and review, I will be referring to previous slides that I used in my lectures. So here, I just colored the column for Gaap because Gaap is our main actor for today. So Gaap was created in 1948 under EO 120. It is both regulatory and a supervisory agency. And as I will underscore later, the Gaap has the power to resolve controversies, to impose penalties. Gaap is not independent of the president, unlike the Commission on Election. It is under the OP. And if you will look at the website of the Games and Amusement Board, you will find there a list of 21 regulated sports, and I will show you that list. So the functions of Gaap will be to enforce laws, of course, to promote fair conduct of games, grant licenses, permits, and adjudicates on violations. So Gaap, again, this is a bit of administrative law, which I also teach at the Ateneo Law School and Pamantasan ng Lungsod ng Maynila. Gaap is an administrative agency and a public office like the Commission on Election or like the Philippine Reclamation Authority to which I belong to. It is created by the state, earlier I mentioned, through an executive order. It has a specific mandate, and what is that mandate? To regulate and supervise professional sports. It has some degree of permanence, unless of course abolished. It is not an ad hoc agency. Because it is a public office, it performs as an aspect of sovereign function, namely to regulate sports. It has a fusion of powers. Admin agencies have three basic powers: the power to investigate, the power to issue rules or quasi-legislation, and third, the power to resolve controversies or quasi-judicial. If you examine the Charter of Gaap, it has those three powers. And lastly, to describe it as an admin agency, to characterize it rather as an admin agency, it has a relation with the state. And under its charter, the Gaap is under the office of the president. So Gaap, like the COMELEC, like the Philippine Reclamation Authority, like the Department of Health, these are all administrative agencies and public offices. So what are the sports? Professional sports which are being regulated by Gaap. Again, I captured this in the website of Gaap. There are 21 sports. Of course, basketball, volleyball, golf, tennis, esports, recently added, boxing, Muay Thai, other contact sports, and of course, horse race betting. So Gaap, again, has supervisory and regulatory authority over these sports. Not over the amateur versions of these sports, but only the professional dimension of these sports. So look, here, this slide captures the functions of Gaap. Professional sports, not amateur sports, not sports in schools, which we will cover after the break. So it has the power to regulate and supervise and issue licenses for sports practitioners. When we say sports practitioners, that would be athletes and coaches. It issues permits for competitions. Without a permit, that competition is not sanctioned and is considered illegal or irregular by Gaap. It has the power to issue rules, to supply the details. It has the power to resolve controversies for violation of the rules and regulations and the charter of the Games and Amusement Board. It has the power to investigate. It has the power to conduct ocular inspections. It has the power to examine financial records. It has the power to oversee the betting aspect of horse racing, and for international cockfighting, not local cockfighting, which is devolved to local government units. For international cockfighting, it is the Games and Amusement Board. And one of its important mandate, Gaap, is to oversee and prevent the proliferation of illegal gambling in professional sports. So here, the Gaap has a specific mandate, but its powers are very broad, as you can see from this slide. So Gaap in action. Again, these are screenshots of from spin.ph. So here, clockwise, let's start with Gaap suspending the Mindanao leg of the Vismin Cup as it digs deeper into the fiasco of cheating. So that it did that for basketball. And going clockwise for esports, again, earlier, I underscored that one of the mandates of Gaap is to, it must issue permits before a professional sport competition can be conducted. Here, there was no permit, and therefore Gaap is cracking down on these illegal activities. Gaap, as earlier mentioned, must sanction competitions. Here, it has to approve. It approved the training bubble of teams in Clark. Gaap blacklisted a team for non-payment of salaries. Again, this is pursuant to one of the rules of Gaap regarding regarding payment of salaries to professional athletes. And lastly, in order to, especially at this time, in order to be given a license to be a sports practitioner here as a player, players must go through a drug test. And here, Abueva moves on the cusp of finishing all Gaap requirements. So here are examples of Gaap exercising its functions under its charter. Let's now talk about professional athletes. We talked about national athletes last week. We will talk about student athletes after our break. For now, we will be talking about professional athletes. Here are some materials, and by the way, I shared these materials to our platform, and I hope you were able to download them. Professional athletes play sports for a living. This is their profession. This is their career. So professional athletes play sports for a living. Number two, in another article, and all of these, by the way, are articles lifted from articles in USA. They are paid for their services. And the most immediate concern is their employment contract. We will discuss this shortly, whether they are employees or not. And the third description of professional athletes, they are quote-unquote entertainment professionals. They entertain the audience. Of course, not just to entertain, but they inspire other athletes and the general public as well. So professional athletes play sports for a living. They are paid for their services in order to live, and they are entertainment professionals. Okay. Earlier, my last question was, are professional athletes employees or are they something else? Here, this is a tax decision in California. Here, the answer is it's not always, professional athletes are not always employees. They're not always independent contractors here. And we have yet to have a categorical determination here in the Philippines, whether they are employees or service providers or independent contractors, but this might be helpful. So the answer is, are professional athletes rather, employees? Are they independent contractors? The answer following this would be, it depends. So but look at the basis for the determination whether they are employees or independent contractors. The crucial indicator or factor would be control. Here, according to the board, the tax board in California, if it's a team sport, then the management or the coach has the player competes under the direction and control of a coach. Therefore, in team sports, they are employees, okay? Such as in football, baseball, basketball, and hockey. But for individual sports competitions like golf, tennis, boxing, wrestling, skating, and midget auto racing, again, these are in the States, they are considered not as employees, but they are independent contractors. Why? Because they are not under the control of a coach or manager in terms of how to play. So what is that determinant? What is that determinant factor? Would be the control by an owner, manager, trainer, coach, or captain. Having the right to direct and the right to control the details of the player's activity. So for team sports, according to this decision, they are employees. But for individual professional sports, they are independent contractors. I also showed this slide last time just to compare and to contrast the 5 types of the 5 categories or the 5 status of possible of athletes. They can either be employees, independent contractors, service providers, beneficiaries, or students. Okay. So the question now here in the Philippines would be, are professional athletes employees of teams and leagues? So again, of course, the answer here is they are or they are not. But in order to answer this question, we must pose this question, because these are the 4 elements in order to establish whether there is an employee-employer relationship between a professional athlete on one hand and a national team or a brand, a commercial company on the other. Does the team select or hire the player? Does the team pay him or her wages or salaries? Can the team dismiss the player? And the 4th, which is the most important element of establishing employee-employee relationship, does the team control the player's conduct and or activities? If the answer to these 4 questions are in the affirmative, if they are all check or all yes, then the answer to the question is they are employees. If the most important here would be control, if a team has no control over the activities of a particular employee, a particular professional athlete, then the answer is they are either service providers or independent contractors. Let me cite one case. The case of a referee. This is a case decided in 2011 by the Supreme Court in Bernarte versus the Professional Basketball Association, Philippine Basketball Association. Here, the Supreme Court said that referees are not employees of the PBA. They are independent contractors of the PBA because, as I earlier explained, the PBA has no right to control the decisions that will be made by a referee on the court. The PBA cannot overrule the decisions of referees. The referees are the absolute and final authority on the playing court. In fact, you cannot question the decisions of a referee before the courts because that will entail a judgment on their part. So the last sentence, the very nature of a referee's job of officiating undoubtedly calls for freedom of control by PBA. So here, according to this case, referees are not employees because PBA has no control over them, but they are independent contractors. The question now is, can we apply this case when we talk about athletes? And again, are referees of leagues the same as athletes of teams? So again, I will not venture to make an answer here. Based on my explanation earlier, please decide on your own whether professional athletes are employees or independent contractors or even service providers. So it might not be a one-size-fits-all answer. It may be qualified to a certain extent, but let me just emphasize that the most important element to determine whether they are or they are not employees would be the box to your right, lower right, which is control. Controlling not just the ends, but controlling the means as well. My advice for everybody, not just for professional athletes and their teams, is to draw up a sports contract. That was my advice last week for national athletes and their national sports associations and federations. This will be the same advice I will give for schools and their athletes. So here's a which you can download. And by the way, I will be sharing my 2 PowerPoint presentations after this session for today. So what are the elements or sections of a sports contract? The name of the parties, of course, the addresses, statement of hiring, who hires who. Of course, it's the team hiring the professional athlete. Term of the contract, is it 1 year? Is it 2 years? Is it 5 years? Duties and obligations of the athlete, duties and obligations of the team, attendance in camps, amount of compensation, if it is a compensation or a fee, when do you get paid? Is there a bonus? What is the effect of betting on your game? Board and lodging, compliance with rules of the club or the athletic association, not playing exclusivity or not playing for any other team for the same sport, not to engage in related activities or even harmful activities, effect of not being in tip-top physical condition, what will be the effect of beneficiaries, and the effect of temporary retirement from active sports. If you download this link, if you click this link rather, there are specific suggestions for all of these items. And what are the other sections of a sports contract? Right of an employer to assign the contract, let's say from another team to another team. Does the team that have that right? To seek injunction for playing playing in other teams, publicity, arbitration if there's a dispute, option to renew by mutual agreement, termination of the contract. Can the team pre-terminate the contract? Can the athlete, not in certain instances of breach, let's say on the part of the team, can it escape from the provisions of that contract? How do you proceed from the termination? Incorporation of relevant laws and rules, effective date of the contract, and date of execution of the contract. Again, these are very important provisions of a contract. So again, I strongly suggest to all the stakeholders here and to all the duty bearers here would be to execute sports contract. For example, the PBA is in the process of revisiting and reviewing its uniform sports agreement or contract, and will soon adopt a new version of its contract after the PBA board approves the uniform contract. Other concerns, again, from the states, there's a union of all the athletes, and therefore they can collectively bargain with NBA and their franchise teams. Can let's say a league impose a cap on allowances and wages and salaries? So this will go into issues of antitrust and anti-competition. Can professional athletes compete in the Olympics? That will depend on the International Federation and the rules of the International Olympic Committee. And is there a minimum age by which an athlete can become a professional athlete? Can there be a prerequisite for education or a requirement for continuing education, assuming you already signed a contract? All of these are important concerns and considerations for professional athletes. So that ends our discussion and lecture about professional athletes. And so again, good morning to everybody. Siguro just a time check. It's almost 10:30 in my watch. Definitely, we will not reach 12 o'clock for today's session. Although my discussion on sports in schools and student athletes will be a little longer than the discussion for professional athletes. And by the way, I clarified with our officers of the Philippine Olympic Committee and Philippine Sports Institute that I will be uploading I will be giving out through, of course, POC and PSI, copies of my PowerPoint presentations after every session, not after the 4 Tuesdays. But for the videos of the 8 modules, the 4 sessions, those will be uploaded after the 4 sessions. So again, let me clarify. For the PowerPoint presentations, all my presentations will be uploaded right after each session. But for the videos of all the modules, they will be uploaded after all the sessions. So again, important topic, interesting topic for all of us would be student athletes. And let me say they are not athlete students. They are student athletes. And I will explain the reason, the importance of that sequence shortly. So the topics for this module would be governance. Who are student athletes? Where do they play? Or they join in inter-school competitions like athletic associations. Sample agreement, rights and protection, grievance procedure, and our last topic for this morning will be about QPE, or quality physical education. And just being true to form, we will start our module 4 with a quizzer. Please click check for yes or true, absolutely true, or no, or false, or partially true with an X mark. So let us start. Student athletes are employees of their schools. Yes or no? So please click in your answers. I suppose the answer to this is more straightforward than the question, the similar statement for professional athletes. So student athletes, because they being an athlete, they're not doing that to make a living. They are student foremost. They are not employees of their schools. So the answer is X. Statement number 2. The law requires schools to have an equal number of male and female student athletes. So please type in your icons. Is there a law in the Philippines which require that in every school for a particular team, let's say obstacle sports or volleyball or athletics, that there must be an equal number of male and female athletes? The answer is there is no such law. There is no such law which imposes this requirement. This I will explain later. What the law requires is for the schools, tertiary schools, to report the ratios. And I will explain that shortly. So there is no law which requires, although this is a human right, this is enshrined as a policy under that law, there's no categorical requirement which calls for parity of representation between male and female athletes. So the answer is X. Elite student athletes can be given condominiums by their schools. So is that an allowable benefit that a school can give to elite student athletes, condominiums. Okay. Check or X? By the way, I will suspend my answer or my take on this during the lecture proper. For now, please answer check or X or cross. Number 4, there is no residency requirement for high school student athletes entering college. Again, there are 3 possible transfers. Of course, high school to college, then high school to high school, another school, or college to college. So for high school student athletes entering college, the answer is check. The answer is yes. There is no residency requirement for high school students entering college. And I will explain that law shortly. Number 5, an athletic association can suspend a school which is a member of that athletic association. The answer is it a check or a cross? The answer is yes. An athletic association can suspend a member school. And that's one of our topics later on, the grievance procedure when there are violations on the part of an athlete or on the part of the school. Number 6, the CHED, Commission on Higher Education, acting on a complaint filed before it and not with an athletic association, can ban a school from an athletic association. So here, for number 5, this was a case filed with the athletic association. And for number 6, it is a case filed with the CHED, not with the athletic association. Yes or no? The answer is yes. The answer is yes. And I will explain this shortly. There is an exception to the rule that the case can be filed directly with the DepEd or with the CHED. And I will explain that before we end this lecture. And our last statement for today's quiz, for today's module 4, would be, is physical education the same as quality physical education? If the answer is no, then where lies the difference? Of course, the obvious answer here is with the term quality as a descriptor of physical education. The answer here is they are not the same. And I will explain what's the difference between quality PE and PE. Okay, so I hope you were able to answer these questions. And again, this is not graded. You will still get your certificates for attending this course and these modules. But hopefully, please try to recall as you one takeaway. One way of having clear takeaways of this module would be to recall and go back to these statements. Okay. Last week, we talked about amateur sports, Philippine Sports Commission. Before our break, we talked about professional sports. We talked about the Games and Amusement Board. And now, sports in schools. We will talk about, of course, the schools. We will talk about a newly created school, the National Academy of Sports. And we will talk about the mandate of the Department of Education and the Commission on Higher Education. By the way, next week, we will talk about local governments in sports, and we will talk about partnerships in sports. As I mentioned earlier and also last week, this slide tells us that sports governance is at various levels of our bureaucracy, either at the national level and at the local government level. For this morning, this module 4, we are highlighting the mandate of the Department of Education. like the Department of Public Works and Highways, like the Department of Environment. The DepEd is a national government agency, while the CHED is a commission which is detached or independent of the DepEd. CHED is attached to the Office of the President, while DepEd, being an alter ego of the President, is under the control of the President. DepEd talks about basic education for public institutions, while for CHED, it talks about higher education, tertiary education, not just for public institutions, but for private institutions as well. So here are some of the functions of the DepEd and the Commission on Higher Education. Last week, again, we talked about national athletes. Earlier this morning, we talked about professional athletes. Now, we will talk about student athletes. Student athlete is defined under a 2015 law, which is RA 10676. So please go over this definition. Then we will dissect the important parts of this definition. So a student athlete must be currently enrolled. Okay? Kailangan naka-enroll siya sa kasalukuyan. No? Currently enrolled in what program? It must be in a full-time curricular program. So that is a requirement. A full-time, not a part-time curricular program. And that athlete or that student must be in good standing to be eligible to represent the school in an inter-school athletic program or competition. So what is the meaning of currently enrolled? Minimum full-time curricular program and eligibility. And that student athlete must be a member of an athletic team or program who represents or has intentions, not necessarily representing now, but who has the intention or the desire to represent the school in an inter-school athletic program or competition. So who is a student athlete? Currently enrolled, minimum program, full-time, eligible, member of a team who is actually representing or has the intention to represent the school in an inter-school athletic program or competition. So that is a student athlete. What are the athletic associations? There are 9 associations enumerated under RA 10676. So these are the athletic associations. Some are national, some are regional. Okay, I will not name this. Please go over the slide. So these are the AAs or the athletic associations. We have last year, our Congress enacted a law signed by our President, RA 11470, creating a National Academy of Sports. Why? What is the purpose of the NAS? And by the way, to your right, to your upper right is the logo of NAS. To develop, if you look at the 4 Ys, it talks about 2 things, the facility and the program. So the facility must be world-class. The program is secondary education, and there must be a special curriculum on sports. And for the facility and the program is to develop highly talented and exceptionally gifted students who have the potential to excel in sports. They are full scholars. But of course, the qualification is they must be natural-born Filipino citizens and they have the potential to excel in sports. Okay? So, not necessarily actual excellence or proven track record, but they must have the potential to excel in sports. What is the NAS? It is a school attached to the Department of Education. It has a governing board and executive officers. Its main campus in New Clark City, which is a public-private partnership arrangement, and that we will discuss next week. It can establish satellite offices. It must adopt an appropriate curriculum for, again, a special curriculum on sports, and it will provide its own selection and benefits for the students other than enjoying a full scholarship with the NAS. So a student, again, going back to this slide, just compares and contrasts a student from an employee. Again, student athletes are not employees. They are not independent contractors. They are not service providers. And in fact, they can also be considered as beneficiaries. Again, under 10676, there is a technical statutory definition of a student athlete. And it is my advocacy, I hope everyone here shares this advocacy, that for national sports athletes, for professional athletes, and for student athletes, for schools in this case, and student athletes to execute their own agreements. Here, this is a participation agreement, which I was able to download in the internet. So here is an example of a student athlete, a participation agreement. Again, student athlete, it underscores the fact that the first priority of student athletes would be education or academic success. And therefore, student athletes must meet all academic requirements. Their academic progress is monitored by the school. There must an athlete, a student athlete, depending on the handbook or the participation agreement, must not, its grade, his or her grade must not fall below a certain grade. Absences are regulated, and excessive absences in this particular draft may result, not necessarily will result in athletes' participation. Excessive absences does not result in an automatic non-play or of an athlete. What the excusable absences will only pertain to athletic competitions, and because there's primacy towards education, student athletes in this draft must be able to submit all class assignments. By the way, I already have published my own template for an athlete, a national athlete of an NSA. I will soon publish in my future, in my later versions of my primer on sports law for all, my own version of a student athletes. I will publish a template agreement. And again, you can download all my primers in my website, albertociagra.com. And you may download that template agreement for national athletes. So one aspect of this participation agreement is academics. The second aspect would be behavior. Student athletes represent the schools, and therefore they must be role models. They are visible representatives of the schools. They must practice sports personship and self-control. How? In fair play, in how to address fans, how to interact with media, using profanity, and being compliant with regulations of the school, local government units, and our national laws. So again, student athletes represent their respective schools and athletic associations. So behavior is the second dimension. The third dimension is physical conditioning and training. Again, the athlete component of being a student athlete. As you all know, for those of us who are athletes, being at the top of your level, it requires intense training, physical activities, and constant feedback. But of course, in the training, in the competition, safe sport must be practiced. Practice sessions and safe participation must be monitored. You must follow the directives and guidelines of your coaches. However, you can raise certain issues with your coaches regarding labored physical response to exercise, even physical, mental, or emotional distress. You must follow the directives of your coaches, and it is only up to the school and your coaches which competitions you will be allowed to play. So these are the physical conditioning and training dimensions or aspect of being a of a student athlete. Next would be the fourth dimension would be teamwork and team expectations. You belong to a team, whether it's an individual sport or a team sport, you belong to a team. You promote the goals of a school, of that team. So you must follow the team rules, you must follow the league rules, you must follow the student athlete handbook, you must not participate in hazing or any form of initiation. If you feel there's any violation of the rules, you must report these. Student athletes and coaches are expressly prohibited from engaging in any sexual intimacy. And here in this template agreement, there is zero tolerance towards hazing, initiation, sexual harassment, and physical punishment. So this is the fourth dimension. And this particular template bars any form of retaliation if a student athlete is a whistleblower or reports any violation of the rules. Again, here's the citation of this participation agreement, which your schools and the athletes may refer to. And of course, if you're under 18, your guardian or your parent must affix his or her signature in this participation agreement. Let's now talk about, if you recall one of the statements in our quizzer, is there a law which requires parity between male and female athletes in a team? The answer is there is no such requirement. Although there is a policy for equal representation for purposes of proper training required of colleges and higher education institutions under RA 11180, which is a law passed in 2018. What is required under this law is to file reports, regular reports about ratios of male and female athletes, male and female coaches, and the grant of scholarship to male and female athletes. Again, what is required of this law is to report. But it is not required. It is not, colleges, universities are not compelled. There is no imposition of a requirement subject to a penalty or punishment if there are more male athletes than female athletes. Again, what is required is to report. Under RA 10676, which is the Student Athletes Protection Act, and earlier we defined who a student athlete is. It is drawn from this, for me, a landmark legislation, RA 10676. What is the policy? Education for all. Physical education has a purpose, not just for sports, but to have for self-discipline, teamwork, and excellence for the attainment of a healthy and alert citizenry. That is the object of sports in schools, so that our student athletes will hone their skills, of course, without neglecting their education, hence the term student athletes, without neglecting their general well-being, to promote and to protect the rights of the student athlete, who is first and foremost a student. This is a statutory policy. This is a legal policy. You are first and foremost a student, not an athlete. And the rights and obligations under this law must be enforced by all officials of the schools, all officials of the athletic associations. And to attain the object, the purpose is quality education while honing his or her skills, reaching his or her full potential as an athlete in an amateur sports setting. Let me underscore the phrase amateur sports setting. How do we differentiate between amateur sports and professional sports? In this material, and again, you can also download this, it is clear what makes an athlete an amateur athlete, which is again also for student athletes, and what makes an athlete a professional athlete. According to this article, the differentiator would be the rewards. Amateur athletes are not paid for their athletic performances, while professional athletes are typically paid annual salaries plus incentives. So what is the reward for professional athletes? Their salaries, their bonuses, their incentives. What will be the reward for amateur athletes? Mainly their athletic scholarships. So again, according to this article, the main differentiator would be, what do they get in return? The rewards. Professional athletes, salaries. Amateur athletes, in schools, athletic scholarship. National sports athletes, representing the country. And of course, there are incentives. And by the way, government and the private sector now are putting in more incentives for those who will land on the podium in the forthcoming Tokyo 2020 Olympic Games and Paralympic Games. RA 10676 talks about protection. And there are two aspects of protection under this law: residency and what are the allowable benefits a school can give, an athletic association can sanction and recognize. What are the benefits and incentives that can be given to student athletes? Let's talk about first residency. There are three levels: high school to college, high school to high school, college to college. For high school to college, there is no residency requirement. For high school to high school, there is no residency requirement. However, to address the issue of piracy, the athletic association can impose a maximum of 1 year residency. Okay? So let me explain this. There is no statutory requirement for residency from high school to high school. However, it depends on any of the 9 athletic associations whether they will impose a 1 year maximum of 1 year residency in order to address the issue of piracy. For college to college, at the tertiary level, it is also discretionary on the part of the athletic association. If ever in the exercise of its discretion and wisdom, an athletic association would want to impose a residency requirement, the maximum is a 1-year residency requirement. And by the way, for high school to college and high school to high school, these residency requirements, assuming there is one imposed for B by the Athletic Association, this will also apply to Filipino student athletes from other countries who want to enroll in a school here in the Philippines. Assuming an athlete from a high school moves to another high school, or from one college moves to another college, can the first or original school punish that athlete for transferring to another school? The answer is no. Here, under RA 10676, an athlete cannot be punished or penalized by the first or originating school by reason of the transfer. Of course, there could be other punishment, but that punishment is not born out of or is not attributable to the fact of transferring to that school. So, not filing an admin case, requiring reimbursement or payment of tuition, delaying or not issuing the grades, or giving incomplete grades solely on account of transferring to another school. So no punishment due to transfer. What are the incentives and benefits? And again, perspective, amateur setting. What are the allowable benefits for student athletes or amateur athletes? Again, scholarship, school fees, learning materials, full board and lodging, uniforms, equipment, reasonable monthly living allowance, insurance, medical services, medical examinations and consultations. And by the way, if you look at this list, according to the law, the list is not exclusive. It is inclusive. A school must can provide for additional incentives. But is the authority or discretion of the school absolute? Can it give any other incentive not covered by the 5? The answer is no. While the list is inclusive, it is not finite, it is not unrestricted. There are certain benefits or incentives which a school cannot give to a student athlete. And let me explain this in more detail. Kindly go over this. One of the important provisions of this law is no to commercialization of amateur sports engaged in by student athletes. Let us dissect these two important provisions of RA 10676. Number 1, the additional benefits must be reasonable. They must not be excessive. Number 2, they must be similar to the list. There's this rule on statutory construction when there is a catch-all provision or etc. The additional provisions here, the additional benefits must be similar to the enumeration. That's use them generis. So it must be similar to scholarship, similar to medical services, similar to supplies and equipment. So reasonable, similar to the enumeration. The purpose is to further enhance academic and athletic performance. Okay. Not just academic performance, not just athletic performance, but because of the conjunction and, all these benefits must enhance academic and athletic performance. Hence, again, let me underscore the conjunction and. Okay. Again, not contrary to the nature of amateur sports. Earlier, we made the distinction between amateur sports and professional sports The main differentiator would be the rewards. And it should not result in the commercialization of a student athlete or a student athlete for sale, in quotes. Okay. So again, no to commercialization of student athletes. The question now is, can a school give an student athlete a house and lot, a condominium, cars, or businesses? So the question now is, are these four reasonable? Does it depend on the school? Are these four similar to what we have enumerated? By giving these four, will this further enhance the academic and athletic performance? By giving these four, will this be contrary to the nature of amateur sports? Or will giving these four will amount to commercialization of a student athlete? So again, this particular has not been tested. This has not been questioned before the courts. And therefore, your opinion is good as mine. So some cases in the States, NCAA as a league, as an athletic association in the States can limit the education-related benefits schools may give. So NCAA as a league, as an athletic association, can impose caps. Number two, a league, an athletic association can also prohibit high school coaches from recruiting middle school athletes. And this does not violate the freedom of speech of our coaches. So again, this is a US case. And lastly, here regarding getting urine samples, in this particular case in 1995, it says here that governmental concern over the safety of minors overrides intrusion in the privacy of student athletes compared to, of course, professional athletes or adults. So here are some US cases. Governance. Let me underscore the importance of the role of DepEd and the Commission on Higher Education. Under 10676, it added into the set of functions given to DepEd and CHED. In addition to their functions under the respective charters, DepEd for basic education, CHED for tertiary education, they regulate and oversee the school's athletic associations, the 9 athletic associations. They ensure that the rights of student athletes are respected and protected, namely commercialization, the benefits, and the residency. And number 3, they can handle and even resolve complaints against the school, athletic associations, and the schools. So these are 3 additional functions given to the DepEd and the Commission on Higher Education. Assuming there are violations on the residency requirement, assuming there are violations on the ban on commercialization, a complaint can be filed by whom? The student athlete, parents, alumni, or any other person representing that athlete. Or a complaint can be filed by the school. Against whom? Who are the respondents in that complaint? It can be a school. It can be an athletic association. It can be against a coach, an athletic director, an alumni, an administrator. Where do you file the complaint? With the athletic association. Any of the 9, the athletic association will investigate and conduct a hearing. It will render a decision. What are the appropriate penalties that can be imposed? There's no finite list of penalties, but there's an example. There are 2 examples under the law: suspend or ban the athlete, or suspend or ban the school. An aggrieved party who does not agree with the decision rendered by the by the athletic association can file an appeal either with the DepEd for basic education and for CHED and tertiary. If you do not agree with the decision of DepEd or CHED, then you can go to court and raise the decision in that of DepEd or CHED. So the regular route would be Athletic Association, then DepEd or CHED, then courts. However, if a complainant feels that the Athletic Association will not act on the complaint, then you can file a complaint directly with the DepEd or CHED. And in this case, it will be a case filed at the first instance because as a rule, the role of DepEd or CHED is appellate in nature. But here, if a student athlete or a school feels that the Athletic Association will not act on that complaint, then you don't have to file that case with the Athletic Association, and it can go directly with the CHED or the DepEd. Our last topic for this morning in Module 4 will be what makes physical education quality physical education. Here, a whole person approach differentiates quality physical education for physical education. And another differentiator between QPE and PE is QPE promotes inclusivity, promotes diversity, male and female, able-bodied athletes, and para-athletes. So that is the main distinction between PE and PE, which is quality-based. For quality-based physical education, it is value-based, achieving the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, preparing you beyond the four corners of a particular school. So that's the main difference between PE and quality physical education. In one of my primers, and this is my most recent primer, I like advocating for an athletes agreement with the National Sports Association. I'm also advocating for schools and other duty bearers and stakeholders to adopt their own QPE charter. And in this primer number 9, I have a template or sample QPE charter, which provides for 8 sections: accessible curricula, teacher education, active engagement, not just of the school, but the whole community, targeted investment for indigenous sports, accommodation for Muslim customs and practices, zero tolerance for gender-based violence, promoting safe sport, promotion of QPE in media, and monitoring and reporting of progress of the QPE policy and program of that particular school. Again, I strongly advocate schools to have their own QPE charter. I strongly advocate the adoption of agreements between athletes on one hand and their respective institutions and organizations on the other. So that ends our module number 4.
All right, I think we're good to go. Some of them are still sending their questions and reactions. Attorney, nainggit po ako sa inyo kanina dahil kayo po ay nakapagkape at this time. I hope yung
kape ko, Josh.
I hope yung mga participants din natin free naman po, everyone is free to enjoy there.
Free ang kape?
Magpapadala po kami, biro lang po. Magpapadala po kami ng virtual coffee, and why don't we take this time, attorney, while we wait for some of our questions and
song and dance?
Hindi po. We'll take this time to get our photo opportunity since
Sure.
Nandito naman po lahat ang ating mga participants, and also I'd like to request everyone to please turn on their cameras. We'll be having a photo opportunity para nandito pa po lahat before we go to our open forum. Everyone, I'm encouraging everyone to please turn on their cameras. Tayo po ay magkakaroon ng very, very quick photo opportunity. Alright, if you're ready na po lahat. Alright, 3, 2, 1. Smile po tayo. Ayan. There you go. Nakangiti na sila. May nakangiti from Camarines Sur, from Iloilo, from May Kawayan, from... Ayan. Sige pa po, a few more seconds. Ayan, from City of Mati. Ayan, nakasmile din sila. Si Sir. From Tarlac, mga nakasmile. Hello po, welcome po sa inyo. A few seconds more left. Hindi na lang po. All. Okay, I think we have it. Kuha na po natin. Maraming salamat po. We can now turn it over. We can now start our open forum. And I'll give you once again ang moderator po natin for this session. I'd like to welcome Ms. Arian Malyarim. Sayang.
It was a very interesting discussion po on professional sports and sports in schools. I'm sure even yung mga non-lawyers po natin na nandito ngayon, yung mga coaches, educators, trainers po natin, mga athletes and all other stakeholders po natin, ay marami pong natutunan this morning. So ngayon po, simulan na po natin itong open forum. Our first question will be coming from Ma'am Sarita Zafra of the Triathlon Association of the Philippines. Can the school require its student athletes to undergo mandatory drug testing?
Mandatory drug testing. If you follow that case which I cited earlier, yung case na yun regarding urine samples, I think it can be justified na for students na pwede magkaroon ng drug testing. Of course, I think not all students will be receptive to that. Some of them might even question that policy. Pero ang maganda rito, not just the school, but maybe even the athletic association can adopt such a policy para on the part of the schools and the athletic association, they're on the same page, implementing the same policy.
So
which is,
another
sorry,
question.
no,
Yes.
by the way, another related issue to that would be, can the school require, let's say, COVID vaccination on the part of the athletes? No? So when I discussed that for the national athletes, I said that they cannot be forced, they cannot be compelled for national athletes because of yung right to consent. Pero again, for student athletes and even for professional athletes, ibang discussion yun.
Okay. Next question will from Michael Diaz of SLSU. Good morning, Attorney Agra. What will be your stand for the school which are less support for a student athlete?
No, ganito, no. While the law enumerates the benefits, wala siyang sinasabi kung anong amount, kung anong extent, kung anong degree. Much of it will depend on the resources of the school. Kasi hindi naman ang schools, hindi pantay-pantay ang resources. Of course, lumalabas dun sa mga medyo ibang schools, they can give more compared to the other schools. But again, there's no fixed benefit. There's no fixed amount. Everything is couched in reasonableness. Kaya ang kanina nga ang tanong ko is yung iba bang benefits baka excessive naman, no? So again, this is a fairly new law, and in the future I think there will be some disputes as to how reasonable is reasonable.
Yes, this is another interesting question from Ardel Carcelar. Is it required under the law that the school should participate in athletic league? If yes, what action should a sports leader need to take if in case his or her school refuses to join any athletic league? Thank you.
Okay, again, athletic associations, there are 9 enumerated under the law, and each association merong member schools. Ang tanong ay, let's say isang member school decides not to participate in a particular season. I suppose each athletic association will have their own rules regarding reasons why a particular school can be excused or not excused. So I'm not familiar with the rules of all these 9 athletic associations, but my answer to that is it will depend on the rules of each athletic association.
Next question from David Euclid Isaac Yu of DepEd Mandaluyong. What is your stand on those league organizers prohibiting girls or student athletes to join because of their boy haircut?
I'm a firm believer in diversity and inclusivity. No, I think I underscored that last time. So hindi ako sang-ayon sa ganung mga policy na may discrimination, may, of course, on the other hand, may abuse or bullying. I'm a firm believer in parity and equality. No, while the law does not require yung kaninang binanggit ko, say number of athletes for male and female, I'm a strong advocate na dapat parity, that dapat equal. Kaya hindi ka papayagan dahil ibang haircut mo or dahil merong kang tattoo. By the way, ako, konting personal note, last month nagkaroon ako ng tattoo. No? So at the age of 58. So right now, no, I'd like to think I'm maturing even as a person. So dun sa mga medyo ganun ang pagtingin sa kalalakihan, sa kababaihan, sa para-athletes, even for LGBTQ, no, panahon na para lawakan natin ang ating pagtingin at pag-unawa. Sports for all. Kaya ang ating seminar ay Sports for All. Hindi lang sports law seminar, no? Ang seminar natin, sports law for all. Kaya, okay, hindi pa huli.
Yes, tama yan. Inclusivity talaga. So next question from Ma'am Sarita Zakra again of TROP. Who oversees the implementation of RA 1026-2015, which is the No to Commercialization Law?
Again, for schools, again, we have this yung Protection Act, no? So again, any commercialization of our student athletes, you can file it with the athletic associations. And as earlier explained, if you feel the athletic association will not act on it, you can file it directly with the DepEd or CHED. But I suppose if you were to file it directly with the CHED or DepEd, there must be a section there or a discussion in that complaint justifying your belief that the athletic association will not act on your complaint. Kasi you are going through what we call the alternative route. So you must be able to justify why you're not going through the regular route, which is filing a complaint with the athletic association.
Yes. Next question from Ateneo de Manila University Swimming and Philippine Fin Swimming Archimedes Lim. First question niya, attorney, will athletes receiving allowances and incentives from PSC or LGUs lose their amateur status? Yun muna yung first question.
By the way, getting an allowance does not make you a professional athlete. Like for PSC, when they give allowances to national athletes, they are doing so not because PSC is the employer of the athletes, but that is their mandate for representing the country and the respective national sports associations. So even LGUs giving allowances, no? Ang ano lang diyan, ang kailangan lang natin bantayan, baka yung allowances lumalabas na parang sahod or baka excessive na siya at hindi na siya reasonable. Kaya kasi doon papasok yung when does it become commercial? When does it become professional, not just amateur? Largely, it will depend on regularity and the amount. If it's reasonable, if it still promotes amateurism. But then again, these are subjective terms, ano? Kaya it can be case to case as well.
Yes. Second question niya, Attorney Al, are graduate students considered as tertiary students? If not, are there any law or rules that pertains to them, especially regarding residency?
For graduate students, let's say a law student, can a law student still join, let's say UAAP? The reason why I said that because my daughter, when she was a law student, joined the UAAP, but she had to follow the residency requirement. So what will be the residency requirement? It will depend on the athletic association, but it depends on the athletic association to impose a residency requirement. But under the law, which we discussed earlier, it's a maximum of 1 year.
Yes. Next question, Attorney. Your view po, your view on the so-called semi-pro or commercial athlete from your number one fan daw po. Itago natin sa pangalang Attorney Rebo Sagisag.
Hindi, kaya ako fan ni Rebo kasi former student ko si Rebo eh. So yun. Sorry, what was the question? Nawala ako kasi umuulan bigla.
Oo nga, Attorney. Yes po, Attorney Al, yung stand nyo po dun sa mga semi-pro athlete natin or yung mga commercial athlete.
Okay. Our law does not define what a semi-pro athlete is. Right now, our law is medyo black and white in terms of amateur and professional. Semi-pro, I suppose yun yung nagiging borderline. So example would be the benefits that I enumerated earlier. Are they reasonable? Does it enhance athletic and academic? Is it similar to the four? Nagbanggit ako ng examples kanina, may pabahay program, may pakotse program, may pa-business program, no? Is this semi-pro or is this commercialization? Again, it can be case to case, but again, for student athletes, mahalaga na hindi pwedeng commercialized. Ang rewards nila would be education and scholarship primarily, not making money. Kasi if it's making money, then baka nandun na tayo sa aspeto ng professional athletes, baka nandun na tayo sa dimension ng commercialization. And therefore, mahalaga dito ang role ng athletic associations. Kasi athletic associations ang ating enforcer. At sila din ang decision maker, hindi lang enforcer. Decision maker whether or not umabot na sa commercialization ang mga benefits. So good luck to UAAP and the other leagues, no? If ever they are confronted with this issue.
Yes. Okay. Our next question is from Joaquin Marte of WAP. For national athletes who are not under a school's sports program, what are the delineations when it comes to excusing students training or participating for the country in international sporting events? Sorry. Gutom na yata ako. Kaya sorry kasi okay, maraming student athletes sa national athletes din, no? And therefore they are governed by two fields, no? Two regimes, two contracts ang pwedeng mangyari. 'Di ba? They have to follow the rules of their school, the rules of their athletic associations, and at the same time they have to follow the rules of their NSAs. So kung assuming may dalawang kontrata, may kontrata ka sa school mo, may kontrata ka rin sa NSA mo, and therefore hopefully walang conflict between these two contracts, because for a student athlete who is a national athlete, he or she must respect those contracts. Yes. And sir, from Neil Patrick Abalos, good morning. I just want to know kung ano po ang dapat gawin kasi some schools are asking supports from parents and sponsors for the athletes or team, pero hindi naman po napupunta sa mga players pero sa fund lang ng school.
Okay. Again, yung pinakita ko kaninang grievance procedure talks about residency, and commercialization kasi yun yung aspeto ng Protection Act. Will it cover other aspects other than those two? Ang legal answer to that is it may not cover other aspects because that grievance procedure which I outlined earlier only talks about RA 10676. It does not cover all other aspects of sports and all aspects of sports in schools. Again, follow schools policies, follow athletic association policies, and apologies, very difficult to give a categorical answer because some of these are indeed case to case.
Yes. Ito, Attorney Al, another interesting question from Junlen Arquez of the Bizcast. Ito, may scenario siya, Attorney. So ito po yung scenario. A player is enrolled in school number 1, but he or she doesn't join the athletic team, then decided to transfer to school number 2. Is he or she is obliged to take a 1-year residency in order to join the athletic meets?
Okay. When we talk about residency under RA 10676, again, one, it talks about student athletes and we define a student athlete in that regard. Ang tanong, student athlete ka ba when you transferred from school 1 to school 2? While you are engaged in a sport, pero hindi ka naman kasama sa team, or wala ka namang desire at that time to represent your school, then you may not be technically considered a student athlete because you do not meet all the requirements of being a student athlete. So baka in that regard, hindi ka kasaklaw nung residency requirement because in the first place, you are not a student athlete in school number 1. Of course, the other position is I'd rather be safe in this mga forum in terms of answering these types of questions. It may be argued that you are a student athlete because you are part of the overall program. So again, these are two views, but the crux of the answer to that would be, student athlete ka ba in school 1 or not? Kasi doon papasok yung application of the residency requirement.
Yes. Another question from Brenda Abelgos. Ask ko lang po if entitled po ang mga professional athletes sa mga benefits provided ng government sa mga government employees at ano po ang mga iyon? Do they also pay tax po ba?
By the way, meron tayong law on tax exemption pag sa yung mga, let's say, binibigay ng PSC or yung mga binibigay ng private corporations to reward mga athletes. Pero iba kasi ang professional athletes. When we talk about professional athletes, doon naman tayo papasok again, empleyado ba sila? Independent contractors ba sila? Kasi iba ang tax implication kung ikaw ay empleyado, kung ikaw ay consultant, kung ikaw ay service provider, kung ikaw ay independent contractor. Kasi halimbawa kung ikaw ay empleyado, may withholding, yung mga ganong aspeto ng tax. Kaya ang primordial question, ano ba ang status ng professional athletes? Again, sa ibang bansa, maliwanag yun. Sa atin, meron pang discussion regarding that.
Yes. Ito, attorney, from University of the Philippines, College of Human Kinetics Dean Francis Kiko Diaz. Sir, what is your personal view when schools go to the courts if, for example, they have an athlete that was deemed ineligible for eligibility rules infringement and that school believes otherwise?
Of course, ang final redress naman of all these disputes, whether you go to court directly or whether you go to the administrative process first, ultimately it will be the courts who will decide. Of course, there must be a controversy before the courts decide. By the way, papaliwanag ko to during some session 4 natin regarding eligibility. No? There's one case which said that which rules on eligibility for entering into programs of schools and other amateur sports. No? Medyo isususpense ko lang yon para si Dean Kiko will continue to attend our sessions up to July 27. No? So again, some sports sectors and organizations frown upon litigation. Yung iba, they'd rather go through arbitration. But it will all depend on kasi sa arbitration, kasi kailangan both parties must agree or it must be embedded in a contract. By the way, we will discuss arbitration. That's our last module. That's module 8. So, but then again, maliwanag na merong dapat avenue for redress or complaints.
Yes, and our last question, attorney, from Mark Dexter Reyes. Good morning, Attorney Agra. A common problem in student athletes' participation to sports competition are professors who tries to stop them from participating by threatening them that they will fail the subject or given a failing grade after their participation, and what advice can you give to us about this matter?
My advice is kailangan maliwanag din ang rules ng school. Kasi ang estudyante must follow the rules and even the teachers must follow the rules. So if there's any complaint or grievance against a particular teacher or professor, then if I were the student, ang una kong pupuntahan would be the school administration, the athletic director. Kaya nga lagi kong ina-advocate, and again, pasensya na po paulit-ulit, maganda merong agreement between the school and the athlete. So that kung merong violation or breach or hindi sinusunod yung agreement, then you have something which is written, signed by both the school, signed by the professional, by the student athlete, para everything is clear. And again, that is my advice for national athletes, for professional athletes, and for student athletes as well. So
Yes.
very exciting ang sports law. And so thank you.
Yes, yun talaga, Attorney Al, ang dapat na abangan pa ng ating mga participants kasi 2 Tuesdays pa po ang kailangan nilang puntahan para talaga makumpleto.
And by the way, let me just highlight on our 4th Tuesday, we will be talking about events. No?
Wow.
We'll be talking about injuries. We will be talking about safe sport. No? But again, for next Tuesday, ang pag-uusapan naman natin, kung napag-usapan natin ng NSAs, napag-usapan natin ng professional teams, napag-usapan natin ng schools, ang pag-uusapan naman natin sa next Tuesday would be sports in local governments and partnerships in sports. So maraming salamat to everybody. Magandang umaga.
Thank you po.
Huwag kayong magsawa at sabay-sabay tayo, sama-sama tayong nag-aaral. Ako rin po nag-aaral sa sports law. At thank you to Philippine Sports Commission, Philippine Sports Institute, and I will be sending again to PSI and POC the presentations for last week and this morning to be distributed and disseminated to all our participants. Good morning and thank you.